Welcome to another episode of the Southwest Desert. We'll be taking an in-depth look at the fascinating world of the Pueblo Native Americans, a Native American group that has defied stereotypes and conventions for centuries. The information for this video is taken from an excerpt of Charles Fletcher Lummis's book, Some Strange Corners of Our Country, The Wonderland of the Southwest, written in 1892. When most people think of Native Americans, they often picture nomadic tribes living in temporary structures like wigwams and teepees. However, the Pueblo Native Americans of the American Southwest have been building and inhabiting permanent, multi-story dwellings since long before the arrival of Europeans in the New World. The Pueblos are the only native group in North America above Mexico that has always lived in permanent houses. When Columbus was still trying to convince the Old World of the existence of the New World, the Pueblos were already living in their comfortable and lofty tenements, some of which were 4 to 6 stories high and contained up to 500 rooms. The origins of these structures remain a mystery, as they predate even the arrival of the Spanish in the Americas. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman, Alan. Please leave a like or comment. For further Southwest adventures, hit the subscribe button. Enjoy this adapted desert commentary from a late 19th century historian. The most striking example of a still inhabited Pueblo village is Taos in northern New Mexico, which consists of just 2 buildings, each 5 to 6 stories tall and containing around 300 rooms. Other notable pueblos include Acoma, with 6 3-story buildings, and Zuni, featuring a colossal 6-story structure sprawling over several acres. Hundreds of ruins of these massive complexes are scattered across the American Southwest, standing as testaments to the Pueblo's architectural prowess. The Pueblo villages were constructed of expertly assembled stone masonry, using only simple tools. The builders had no metal of any sort and therefore could not dress stone, as many superficial observers have supposed they did, but selected sandstones and limestones which broke naturally into rather regular shapes, and laid these in mud mortar with remarkable skill. The buildings were designed with defense in mind, featuring windowless lower exteriors and restricted access via retractable ladders. The stacked terrace design allowed inhabitants to retreat upwards if the ground level was breached, and the rooftops served as elevated battlement platforms. The architecture of the Pueblos is unique and characteristic, and their original houses look unlike anything else in the world. They are all terraced, so that the front of a building looks like a gigantic flight of steps. The second story stands well back on the roof of the first, which thus gives it a sort of broad, uncovered porch its whole length. The third story is similarly placed upon the second, and so on up. There are no stairs inside even the largest of these buildings, except sometimes ladders to go down into the first story when that is built in the old fashion without doors. All these architectural peculiarities were for purposes of defense. The lower story was a dead wall, into which no enemy with only aboriginal weapons could break, and some of these walls have laughed at civilized field pieces. The ladders could easily be drawn up, and the level roofs made an excellent position from which to rain stones and arrows upon a foe. Even if the enemy captured the first roof, the people had only to retire to the second, from which they could fight down with undiminished advantage. Inside, the Pueblos lived tidy, comfortable lives in meticulously maintained rooms, complete with plaster walls, pine rafters, and small windows. Nearly every room has its queer southwestern fireplace, in which the sticks are burned on end. Those for heating alone are very tiny and stand in a corner, but the cooking fireplaces often fill one side of a room, and under one of their roomy hoods, nearly a dozen people could sit. These Pueblos natives are peaceable and industrious, good hunters and brave warriors when need be, but quiet farmers by profession, as they were when the outside world first found them. They have always elected their own officials, and they obey the laws both of their own strange government and of the United States in a way which they certainly did not learn from us, for there is no American community nearly so law-abiding. They are entirely self-supporting and receive nothing from our government. They are not poor nor lazy, and they do not impose servile tasks upon their wives. One of my Pueblo neighbors in Isleta lent the hard cash to pay off our troops in New Mexico during the Civil War. Quite as interesting and remarkable as the best types of present Pueblo communal houses are the ruins of their still more ancient homes. It was long supposed that the so-called cliff builders and cave dwellers were of an extinct race, and much more of silly and ignorant surmise than of common-sense truth has been written about them. But as soon as there was any really scientific investigation of the Southwest, like Bandelaire's wonderful researches, the fact was fully and finally established that the builders of these great ruins were nothing in the world but Pueblo Indians. They have not vanished, but simply moved for a variety of reasons, and their descendants are living to this day in later Pueblos. Indeed, we now know the history of many of these ruins, and the Indians themselves. The Pueblos used always to build in places which nature herself had made secure, and generally upon the top of mesas, or islands of rock. Those who settled among the peculiar terraced canyons which abound in some parts of the Southwest usually built their towns upon the shelves of the cliff, while those whose region furnished precipices of easily carved stone hollowed out caves therein for their dwellings. It all depended on the locality and the surroundings. A canyon of the cliff builders is a wonderfully picturesque and interesting place. The stratification was a great help to the builders of these strange chasm towns, and doubtless first suggested to them the idea of putting their houses there. The cliffs are many times as far apart in such a canyon at their tops as at the bottom. Sometimes there is a perennial stream at the bottom, but oftener in this arid region the dry season leaves only a chain of pools, which were, however, adequate for the water supply of these communities. The several lower shelves of the gorge were never built upon, and the water was all carried several hundred feet up the cliff in earthen jars or tight-woven baskets. Such inconvenience of the waterworks has never deterred the Pueblos, and it is a striking commentary upon the savage dangers of their old life to see at what a fearful expense of toil they brought water any distance to a place that was safe. At Acoma to this day, every drop of drinking water is brought in jars half a mile over an enormously difficult cliff trail, and in some of the old-time Pueblos the daily water journey was even worse. But safety was before water, and so the swarthy people built their homes far up the side of the cliff, and there was a great saving of labor in another way. As a rule, the alternate strata in those canyons are of different kinds of rock and unequally eroded. Between each pair of harder strata, the softer intermediate one had been so gnawed out by wind and water that its neighbors above and below projected many feet beyond it, the lower one always farthest. So there the cliff builder found that nature had made ready to his hand 3 of the 6 sides of every room. The smooth, solid rock of the shelf was his floor, and a narrow but endless porch outside as well. The overhanging rock of the ledge above was his roof, frequently a very low one, but certainly watertight, and the face of the intermediate stratum was his back wall. He had only to build 3 little stone walls from stone floor to stone roof, a front wall and 2 end walls, and there was his house. These cliff rooms were extremely small, varying according to the strata, but seldom more than 12 feet long, 8 or 10 feet deep, and 5 to 8 feet high. In many of them no ordinary person could stand erect. There were seldom any windows, and the doors, which served also as chimneys, were very low and but 12 to 18 inches wide. An enemy at the very door would be so crouched and cramped in entering that those within could take him at a disadvantage. There are several of these canyons of the Cliff Builders easily accessible from Flagstaff, Arizona. They are gigantic gashes in the level uplands. One comes to their very brink without the remotest suspicion that such an abyss is in front. One of these canyons is over 20 miles long and in places 600 feet deep. It contains the ruins of about 1,000 of these small cliff houses, some of which are very well preserved. In most of these houses there is little to be found. The floors are 1 and 2 feet deep with the dust of ages, mingled with nutshells and thorns brought in by the rock squirrels which are now the only tenants. Digging is often rewarded by finding fine stone axes, beautiful agate arrow points, the puzzling discoidal stones, and even baskets of yucca fiber, exactly like the strange plaques made in Moqui or Hopi today. The baskets crumbled to dust soon after they were exposed to the air. There are few other countries so dry that a basket of slender vegetable threads would hold its patterns for 400 years or more under a foot of soil. Between the small cliff houses already described and the cave dwellings there is a very curious link: houses or even whole towns built in a natural cave. Montezuma's castle is such a one, and there are many others. These caves are not like the Mammoth Cave, great subterranean passages, but great hollows, generally like a huge bowl set up on edge in the face of the cliff. They absolutely protect the enclosed town above, on both sides, and generally also below. They are usually high up from the bottom of the cliff, and between them and the foot is a precipitous ascent which no enemy could scale if any resistance whatever were made. Such towns could be captured only by surprise, as we know that in very rare cases some were captured. Some observant but uninformed travelers have been sadly misled by the regular round cavities which are found in the ground near these lofty pueblos, and have taken them for water tanks. Such a notion could arise only from entire ignorance both of the history and the ethnology of the Southwest. These circular cavities are the remains of the estufas, or sacred rooms of the men, which were generally made underground. The roofs have long ago disappeared, and only these pits are left. They never had anything more to do with water than the fireplaces had. The Pueblo reservoirs were something entirely different. These huge houses were generally far from regular, for the simple reason that there never was a master architect to control the structure. Every family built its part of the tenement to suit itself. There could be no bossing in such things, for Native Americans are essentially tribal, and under that organization anything like a feudal authority is an absolute impossibility. Still, the builders agreed fairly well as to the general plan, and the great structure was sometimes very symmetrical. The romantic Cueva Pintada, which not a dozen white men have ever seen, is a very good type of these caves on a smaller scale, being only some 50 feet in diameter. It looks very much like the bowl of a gigantic ladle set into the cliff 50 feet above its foot. It contains several cave dwellings but no houses of masonry, though these occur at other points of the cliff. The most extensive and wonderful cave communities in the world are in the Great Cochiti Upland, some 50 miles northwest of Santa Fe. The journey is a very laborious one, but by no means dangerous, and if you can get a good Native American guide, you are apt to remember it as the most interesting expedition of your life. The country itself is well worth a long journey to see, for it is one of the wildest in North America. The enormous plateau is split with canyons from the mountains to the deep Warren River, and the mesas which separate them are long triangles which break off in 1,000-foot cliffs in the chasm of the Rio Grande, their narrow points looking like stupendous columns, whence they get their Spanish name potreros. In this noble and awesome wilderness, several tribes of Pueblo Native Americans dwelt in prehistoric times. It probably did not take them long to learn that In such a country of soft cliff, it was rather easier to dig one's house than to build it, even when the carpenter had no better tools than a sharp splinter of volcanic glass. In the superbly picturesque canyon of the Rito de los Frijoles is the largest of all villages of caves, deserted for more than 400 years. Outside its unnumbered cave rooms were more rooms yet, of masonry of bricks cut from the same cliff. A few miles farther up the Rio Grande, on the top of the Great Plateau nearly 2,000 feet above the river, are two huge castle-like buttes of chalky tuff, each some 200 feet high. They are the most easily accessible of the large cave villages of North America, being not over 10 miles from the little railroad town of Espanola. One can clamber up a trail on either side of the Santa Clara Canyon to the plateau at the top, and thence less than an hour's walk will take one to either of these great aboriginal honeycomb homes. The Puyai, which is on the south side of the canyon, is the largest and has many hundreds of cave rooms. They are burrowed out everywhere in the foot of the perpendicular white cliff, in tiers one above the other to a height of 3 stories. The caves are small, generally round rooms 8 to 12 feet in diameter, with arched ceilings and barely high enough to allow a man to stand upright. The old smooth plaster on the walls remains to this day, and so do the little portholes of windows and the niches for trinkets. Upon the top of the cliff, and in an almost impregnable position, are the ruins of a large square pueblo built of blocks of tuff. In this same wild region are the only great stone idols, or, to speak more properly, fetiches, in the United States, the mountain lions of Cochiti. They are life-size and carved from the solid bedrock on the top of 2 huge mesas. To this day, the Native Americans of Cochiti before a hunt go to one of these almost inaccessible spots, anoint the great stone heads, and dance by night a wild dance which no white man has seen or ever will see. The Pueblo Native Americans' architectural feats and thriving communities serve as a powerful reminder of the diversity and complexity of Native American societies. Their enduring legacy challenges our preconceptions and invites us to deepen our understanding of the rich histories and cultures that have shaped the American experience. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the fascinating world of the Pueblo Native Americans. Be sure to tune in next time for more captivating stories from the Southwest Desert. Please leave a like or comment. For more desert romps, hit the subscribe button.